Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. While we're waiting for folks to gather and join us, let me describe the 1960s High School Students Project. This is our inaugural Facebook Live. Uh, we'll be sharing uh, information on what's on the minds of those who are in high school in the 1960s. And what we'll do is we'll be reflecting, we'll be remembering, we'll be recalling, we'll be reminiscing, we'll be sharing. We'll have tiny thoughts and large memories. So there is a lot of things we'll be covering today. I have two guests that will join me, uh, Gordon Basichis and Okella Trice, and they will be talking about what they remember being in high school in the 1960s. They'll be sharing their post. Gordon's post went up this morning, and Okella's post will be going up on Thursday. So if you get a chance to go and click on the links that will get us to the post, you'll be able to read what their submissions are. And also, we'd like for you to comment. Maybe we'll be able to get a discussion going regarding what was like being in high school in the 1960s. So we are here this evening with this inaugural event, to provide a way to share, talk, reflect, reminisce. We've gotten a lot of exciting comments so far on Facebook and on the comments page on the blog. So if you haven't had a chance to go there, either during the session or after the session, please go to whatsonjerome'smind.com/1960s. And at the bottom of that page, there'll be a button that you can click to see submissions. So people are gathering, and we are waiting for them. I could say this is a project that I thought of just 2 months ago. I was talking to my website designer and producer about what we could do to announce the 3-month anniversary of my website, What's on Jerome's Mind. And we came upon the idea of inviting guest contributors so they could share their reflections. And I realized that in the course of that conversation that I had been out of high school for 55 years. I graduated from Germantown High School in June of 1965. And by this fall of 1965, I was a freshman at Howard University. So trying to reflect on 55 years since high school has been quite a challenge. As I'm reading the submissions of the various contributors, all of them are very moving, very informing, and it's a lot of ways. We are quite remarkable in the sense that here we are able to reflect. While I graduated from the high school in 1965, I opened the What's on the Minds of the 1960s high school graduates to anyone who graduated or anyone who attended high school from 1960 to 1969. So that'll pick up people who started high school in the 50s, late 50s, and graduated or finished up in the 60s, or people who started in the 60s and ended up in graduating or finishing high school or leaving high school in the 1970s. So we have a range of options or a range of possibilities, a lot of different stories, a lot of different tales, a lot of different information to share. As we're looking back on the 1960s, we see that a lot of issues are repeating themselves. For example, in 1962, Dr. Martin Luther King had one of his marches across the Pettus Bridge, and You see that's in the news today. In 1965, we had the Voting Rights Act, which expanded the rights of African Americans and others to participate in the political process in the United States. And today we see voter suppression alive and well, and people are trying to ensure that their votes will be counted in the upcoming elections in November of 2020. So we've expanded. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. We've lived lives. As I indicated, I left high school in '65, graduated in '65. I'm one of those who have to be reminded of what I did in high school. So when I go back to Philadelphia occasionally, people will pick up conversations with me as if we were in high school just yesterday. And I have to remind them that I hadn't kept up with all the comings and goings of everyone. What was particularly nice, about 10 years ago, a group of people who stayed in Philadelphia started what was called the Back in the Day Picnic. So every third Saturday in July, people would get together. I think I've attended 3 or 4 of those, and you get to see people and to see their family, to see how to catch up on stories. So people are getting together, talking and sharing. And with Facebook, we have a lot going on. So let me introduce my guests, Gordon Basichis and Okella Trice. So Gordon, tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and share with us your reflections, what some of the things are contained in your essay.
It's good to be here, Jerome, to begin with. And then part of my looking back, it looks like it was an era when there was a post-war era. And because it was a post-war era, there was an age of opportunity for people who were from the lower middle class, working class. And it's less so today. It's one of the things that's not repeating itself is the window of opportunity where it was there for a while because everybody needed bodies and everybody needed people to go to the workforce. And it was a chance to advance. And as such, we were geared up to advance in high school, to move forward, to do better than our parents. At the same time, we didn't know which end was up and which way to go, and we had to feel it out on our own. Our parents, who were largely, I would say, middle class, lower middle class, or working class people, didn't really understand what the world had to offer, and as such, you had to work your way through it. That was the original aspect of it that is not repeating itself today because the windows of opportunity are not what they were then, as far as I can say. And other things, of course, are working themselves together, which are, the voting rights, as you pointed out, some of the other things, and one has to wonder, why are we going through this all over again? But we are. And it's necessary to go through all this again. At the same time, you start to wonder, is this a cycle that keeps on repeating itself ad infinitum? Because apparently we're going through it 2-3 times in our lifetime, and our lifetimes are only a span of maybe 70 years or so. My own experience was first to feel my way out of Philadelphia, which I did pretty early. I looked at high school as getting from point A to point B, which was college. And I looked at college of getting from point B out into the world that I could see in movies and TV. I could see in other areas that certainly weren't happening in Mount Airy and Germantown. And this world of allure, of romance, of excitement, adventure, it was all out there. And how do you find that world? And the next 50 years I spent really looking for that world and finding it to a great degree.
So, Gordon, you graduated from high school in 1965?
I graduated in '65. I graduated with you in your class.
Yes. Yeah, but the story is we didn't know each other then, and we only reconnected a few years ago on Facebook. So We've come full
It was
circle.
back then you graduated with Roman numerals on the listing. It was so old.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okella.
really. They gave you a rock and they inscribed in rock that you just finished school, way
It
back
feels
then.
like that, Gordon. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, really. And you carried the rock around to show that you really
That
did
you
go to
actually
school and
did.
learn.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Uh,
Okella, tell us a little bit about you, and you graduated from Germantown High School in
in
1962.
1962, I was in the last class in the public school system in Philadelphia that finished mid-year in February of 62. Students of my era started February of 59 and graduated in 62. The following year was the first time that Philadelphia had a combined class, and everybody graduated at the same time. I entered Germantown High School from Roosevelt Junior High School, but I had prior to Roosevelt attended Henry H. Houston. And prior to Henry H. Houston, I was at Eleanor Cope Emlyn. Henry H. Houston, I would say, was my real first exposure to racism from teachers and from classmates. Then it went on to Germantown High, where I read Gordon's, much like you, Gordon. I thought high school was a waste of time. I didn't quite understand or see. I do understand now the value of having done it at the time that I did do it. But I found a lot of what I got in high school were not the romance of high school. It was not the partying. It was not, um, you know, going as Gordon did, being at the beach, that kind of thing, because we didn't go to the beach that often. But I found a sense of learning core values. When I was in high school, they were still reading scripture, or at least a Bible verse in the morning. They would do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then they would have roll call. Gordon had a problem with people being able to pronounce his last name. I had a problem with teachers who refused to call me by my name, Okella. I refused to accept that they felt the way they pronounced my name is prettier. And ultimately, my mother was called in. And whatever the DNA, the drive, the home training, the Black community, the Black family, I would not let that female teacher call me by anything other than Okella. And it became a routine morning ritual. The students would say, "Do we have to go through this again?" She's not answering. Her name is Okella. She only answers to Okella. And I would tell the teacher, it doesn't matter that you think it's prettier. I will only answer to my name. And even with my mother, yes.
Yeah. So we can pick up some of the story there.
Okay.
So
okay.
hold that thought.
Okay.
So I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to that. So Gordon, what are you trying to convey in your submission? What's the key, or one of the key items you'd like to convey? What would you like people to take away from it?
I think one of the key things that I convey, at least from my personal experience, and I've seen it in others as well, there's a mix of things that take place. With some people, they plod, they move through things one after another with great determination and great deliberation. Other people, they're products of fate and circumstance. They're children of fate and circumstance. So they move through, and it's almost opportunity presents itself. And sometimes opportunity presents himself not necessarily directly as opportunity, but in the guise of something else. Somebody comes along, in literature and Zen literature, about the teacher comes when the student is ready. And to some degree, I found that to be the case. When you're sitting there at the end of the rope, so to speak, and with nowhere to go, somebody walks into your life and starts to move you in a different direction. And you either seize that opportunity at the time or you let it go and then you wonder what you did with your life, depending on how you play the game. And I think it's really that's your element of self-determination. And as a writer and an author, I've thought about this a lot over the years and how there are really no coincidences. It's just opportunity that presents itself, whether you see it or whether you don't, and whether you move on it and whether you don't. And for me, that was life. I mean, I moved from different things to another, and in essence, to some degree, in a psychic sense, changed costumes along the way as I took on different responsibilities and different things that I did, going from first show business, of course, which was one discipline, and then ending up in intelligence and counterintelligence and a variety of other things that were much more hair raising, let's put it that way, even though show business has its moments for sure. So it is.
You were in show business and real business, huh?
I was in show business, and show business led to real business. What really happened to me is I was working and I was writing and I was doing a producer, a well-known producer. I'm not going to mention his name, but he did some things that everybody would recognize. And he said, do you want to do the book on Vicki Morgan, who was Alfred Bloomingdale's mistress? Sure, why not? It was something to do, and it looked like it was something of interest. And I got involved in that. And instead of the typical old man and the young girl and the whole sexual act of that, or the whole sexual interaction, instead what it became was this world of international intrigue and power and money and moving power around and the dynamics, which left me in a whole different spot in life. Vicki Morgan, who was one half of it, she had been murdered. Alfred Bloomingdale, died under suspicious circumstance, let's put it that way. And, there I was at the corner. What do I do now and what's happening? And somebody who was very high up in government wanted to know my story and the information that I had from that last little thing. And he said to me one day, he said, look, I know you're street smart, but I've been down every street in the world. And if you want to see how the game is really played, this is your opportunity if you come with me. So I went with him for 12 years. And life moved on from there. And when he passed away in the mid-90s, I ended up starting my own business, which is more or less related to that in the private sector, meaning intelligence gathering and investigation and all the rest.
Thank you. That's very so. And we'll come back to that because in your title you use the term mystery, and life is mystery. But I'll come back and ask you about that. Okella, you can pick up your story. You were talking about as you. What are you trying to convey in your piece? One of the things you already mentioned was about the whole issue of how people perceived you and how they even wanted to call you other than by your name.
Other than by my name, and what I realize now, I was as most of us of color at that time, we were learning to maneuver and straddle different aspects of life. You don't necessarily at the time know what's happening, as people are not encouraging or deliberately trying to dissuade, but there's the beginnings of understanding what life is like and learning how to code switch so that you are accepted in environments where you may not necessarily be accepted. Where you know that you can function and be as capable as other people. But you start to see it. I started to see it. I wasn't sure what it was, but in hindsight, it's very clear now as to what it was.
So you mentioned the code switching. You mentioned being so as we were coming through high school, demographically speaking, we ended up in integrated environments.
Yes.
So the populations were changing. And for you, Okella, you indicated how you had to learn how to manage the situation and how that ultimately led you to a sense of justice and fairness and struggling. When Gordon encountered it from his perspective, it gave him an opportunity to, if we use common or today's terminology, how to work in a multiracial, multicultural environment.
Mm-hmm.
Both of us, everybody's in relatively the same environment, and Gordon talks about how that jettisoned him to be an international person, and for you, it jettisoned you to, or promoted you, propelled you to be a social justice person. So,
yeah, more so. Particularly, I didn't see myself as a social justice person at that time. But then by the time I got to college, by the time I married, and by the time I had daughters, all of, or many of the feelings, many of the experiences became real and became a source of discontent for me. And so
yeah,
I did end up actively involved more than my family ever knew here in LA. I was going to meetings and I was demonstrating, and I would always say, if my father knew I was sitting up in here, he would have a fit. Or as I would be out on Hollywood Boulevard marching, if they turn on the TV and see me, they are going to have a fit. But I
well, let me put in a notice, not a disclaimer, but Okella is Okella Paige Trice, and she's my oldest sister. So as I'm reading her submission, I'm learning more about her than I never knew.
yeah,
So,
they didn't know. They didn't
I didn't
know
know that.
they didn't know.
So
So yeah, and so I became
yes. So Gordon,
quite a
let me pose a question to you. What was one of the most important lessons you learned? If you had just to choose one uh, from then and now.
I mean, as you were mentioning, I mean, Germantown was an integrated school, and one adapted, if one had any sense, to an integrated school in an integrated condition, which was fine. I mean, I never had a really any problem whatsoever in that school to speak of. And as the world changed, and I could see it change from the different positions I had, both from the global economy and working in show business, and then later on in the business I am, I saw where the world has expanded to that, where, yes, on a general level, one would have to be sort of insane not to see it on a more general level and to see the strife and the tensions and everything. But on the levels that I deal with directly, meaning the people I deal with, I have to interact with in different parts of the world and different parts of the country. Um, Nobody cares what anybody is. It's all about business. It's all about looking into things. There's a mutual connection because there's a mutual need, and everybody has their own self-interest involved in it, which is one of the great driving forces of life. And the early imprint of dealing with people and realizing that my type, so to speak, is not the only type in the world has done me good later on when I realized it's a wide world and getting wider all the time. And we're dealing with people from emerging nations as well as established nations. And this becomes an area of understanding that the other just looks parochial and frankly insane, to even dwell on that, because the world is moving in this direction. It will continue to move in this direction. And regardless of all the signs and the billboards and whatever else, and these people that want to go back to some other way that was probably mythical to begin with, totally illusory. The world is moving in this direction. It's a global economy, and with it is it's a global society to a great degree, at least on certain levels that I experience. On other levels, maybe not so much the case yet, but certainly where I am.
So yeah, thank you, Okella. What's a important lesson you've learned looking back between then and now?
I think the or one of the important lessons that I've learned is that human beings do well on some level, but historically we don't seem to do well when it comes in large numbers anyway. Do well as being human one to another. We still fall into our own schisms and categories and have a tendency to fear the other without knowing the other. But that also, from what reading I do, I'm not as avid as some people. That just seems to be, for me, just a condition of mankind. That's just where we are. so that those of us who can see beyond and who do understand beyond just have to continue to demonstrate in our own way and exhibit in our own way that there is the humanity, there is the kindness, and we just have to continue to do what we do to counteract those that don't see life the way we do.
I'm going to put my producer on the spot right now because I can't see any comments, even though she gave me all the instructions to to how to read them. I don't see a comment anywhere.
Yeah, you know.
All I see is pictures. So, Ty, or do we have any comments at all? Oh, we just lost her. So she'll come back in. So on another note, Gordon, is there any music? Is there a song that stands out? If we were putting together a Spotify playlist, what would be on your list? What's one song that would be on?
There's so many. You know, I was around the music business, so it's really hard to pinpoint for one. The line that I always find is appropriate or relative to me is the Ballad of Pancho and Lefty. And the dusted Pancho bit down south ended up in Lefty's mouth, which was me, basically. And, you know, I ate the dust and life moved on from there into strange places. You know, because the songs and music and everything, I was so involved in different parts of it, everything from rhythm and blues. I mean, I did a lot of public relations for, well, I did it for Barry White. I did a little bit for Smokey Robinson. I did for the Righteous Brothers. Number of other people. I worked in PR at the time, and I worked for Jay Bernstein, who was a character all to himself. And these were his clients, and I worked with the different clients in music that way. There was also rock groups. I was also the Beach Boys on the other end of the spectrum. So there was just so much. I was inundated. I was out like maybe 2, 3, 4 nights a week at music venues. And people talk about the great concert from in the June of 1974. I was out every night, you know, doing the whole LA Rainbow Room, whiskey, the whole deal, you know, so the Roxy and everything. So it's really hard for me to pinpoint.
Okay. Okella, do you have a song you remember?
Well, I don't tend to remember songs until I hear them, but I knew this might be a thought you would bring up. I think one of the ones that stands out for me is Aretha Franklin's Respect.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Do you remember a line from that?
No, I don't.
Or maybe you break out to your Riri number.
No, literally, I don't remember a lot until I hear it. It's none of it is in my brain that way.
Oh, okay. All right. Good. Yeah. I don't know whether Ty can hear me or not, or do we have any questions, Ty?
I hear you. There are no questions, but you're definitely getting comments. James Sloan says, I was curious about the project, though it's just getting started. I like the concept. By the way, I graduated with your brother James from G-Town High School in June '63. Many people are saying it's fun. They love people so much. So it looks like people are intrigued.
Great. That's very good. So, hello, James. I see you on Facebook from time to time. So that's where I see most people these days because I, like many, are sheltering in place. So, Gordon, and then Okella, what's one last thought you'd like to leave as we end this conversation?
I think at this point, reflection is good up to a point. Reflection is important. But for us, the art form is to keep moving and keep pushing it out and keep pushing forward in all the stuff we do. Find new challenges and new things to do and new involvements and keep going until you get to the end. And then you go out on your shield rather than just sit there in a passive position. Go out like you're supposed to go out.
Go out like you're supposed.
Still doing something.
Still doing something, yeah.
Okella?
So for me, you know, it's you know, well, we've become the seasoned, and I know I remember hearing older folks say, It's not what you say, it's what you do. So life really is a portal through which you exhibit what you believe so that people can trust who you are. And you take responsibility for what you choose to do so that there again, trust can continue to build. And you make the difference where you can. A lot of people don't think they can, but you can make the difference in your own small community by the way you carry yourself and how you choose to interact with your community.
So thank you very much. So, and thank everybody who tuned in, logged in, streamed in for joining us. This is our inaugural Facebook Live for the 1960s project. In this project, we'll be hearing reflections of people who attended high school in the years 1960 to 1969. I invite you to read the submissions on the website and leave comments so we can keep the conversation going. So we'll be having 2 posts per week. So Gordon's post is up today. Okella's will be up on Thursday, so look for hers. And then every Tuesday at 5 p.m., we'll have a Facebook Live with the 2 authors of their submissions for that week. So until next week, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we look to you to share your tiny thoughts and your large memories. Thank you for joining us, and good night.
Thank you.
Take care, you all. Take care.
You too.